The Galactic Union had dismissed humans as an anomaly, too cautious, too risk-averse, too concerned with safety protocols. Admiral Krell of the Ardaxian Empire had famously declared them the cowards of the cosmos after observing human military exercises that emphasized retreat strategies and defensive positioning. When John Carter first arrived as Earth's ambassador to the Union Council, the other species barely acknowledged him. The Valkyrie representatives, with their imposing exoskeletons, merely clicked their mandibles in amusement. The Zoth delegation, renowned for their conquests of 12 systems, didn't bother to look up from their neural feeds. Humans calculate risk before acting, John explained during his introduction speech. We plan for failure because we've learned from it. The chamber erupted in what humans would recognize as laughter, though it came in many forms, from the harmonic trilling of the avian pecteri to the subsonic rumbles of the massive drone delegates. Tell me, Ambassador Carter, asked Hizix, the Zoth Prime, how does a species that takes 3 safety briefings before a routine shuttle launch expect to contribute to interstellar society? John smiled politely. I suppose we'll have to show you. He couldn't have known how soon that opportunity would come. 6 months later, a distress call reached the Union. A mining colony on the outer rim had gone silent. The Zoth sent their elite warriors to investigate. None returned. The Ardaxians sent a battle cruiser next. It transmitted only a few seconds of footage before all contact was lost. The images showed a darkness that moved like a living thing. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was something that consumed light, matter, and energy. The Union scientists called it the void entity. More reports came in. An outpost in the Lyra sector, gone. A research station near the Cygnus arm, vanished without a trace. The pattern was clear. The entity was moving toward more populated areas. The Union Council called an emergency meeting. The chamber that had once rung with laughter was now filled with tense silence. Species known for their bravery were discussing evacuation plans. Warriors famous for their conquests were calculating retreat routes. John Carter sat quietly, listening to their desperate proposals. The Valkyries suggested a massive energy weapon that would take years to build. The Zoth wanted to sacrifice an entire star system as a diversion. The Pecteri were already loading their ancestral archives onto Orcs. When it was Earth's turn to speak, John stepped up to the central platform. The chamber fell silent again, but differently this time. No one expected much from the humans. The Union mocked us for our caution, he began. You laughed at our safety protocols and our contingency plans. But humans have been preparing for catastrophe since we first looked to the stars. He activated a holographic display showing Earth's defensive systems, networks of satellites, shield arrays, and monitoring stations that far exceeded what the Union considered necessary. We've been developing technology to counter extinction-level threats for generations, John continued. Not because we faced them, but because we feared them. Admiral Krell leaned forward. What are you suggesting, human? I'm suggesting, John replied, his voice steady, that the cowards of the cosmos might be the only ones prepared for this moment. The Union representatives exchanged glances. The same species that had dismissed humans now looked at John with newfound interest, and the first flickers of hope. Earth stands ready to assist, John said. All we ask is that you listen carefully to our plan. Because when it comes to preparing for the worst, humans are the experts. The human ships arrived 3 days later. They were not the largest vessels in the galaxy, nor the most heavily armed. What made them special was something the other species couldn't see, their design philosophy. Lisa Reynolds commanded the lead ship, the Endeavor. She stood on the bridge looking at the swirling darkness on the main screen. The void entity had grown since the first reports, now spanning half a star system. Status report, Lisa said. Alan Walsh, her security chief, looked up from his station. Union forces are holding position behind the third moon. They're waiting for our signal. Lisa nodded. The Union Council had been skeptical about the human plan at first. They had expected weapons, bigger guns, stronger bombs. Instead, the humans brought sensors, shields, and a theory. "Begin the scan sequence," Lisa ordered. On the bridge of the Endeavour, the crew worked with calm efficiency. They had practiced this drill dozens of times, not because they had faced a void entity before, but because humans always practiced for the worst scenarios they could imagine. Doug Wilson, the chief engineer, studied the incoming data. The entity is consuming energy at a steady rate. All forms, thermal, electrical, even potential energy and matter. "And it's growing?" Lisa asked. "Yes, but not randomly. There's a pattern." This was what the humans had bet on, that even a seemingly chaotic force would follow certain rules. While other species saw only destruction, humans looked for patterns they could use. Maria Garcia, communications officer, looked up from her station. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Zoth flagship. Their commander wants to know when we're going to attack." Lisa exchanged a glance with Alan. The Zoth were warriors, always eager for battle. They didn't understand that some enemies couldn't be defeated by charging in. "Tell them we're still gathering data," she replied, "and remind them to maintain their current position." The scans continued for 6 hours. The crew worked in shifts, analyzing every aspect of the entity. Other species might have called this delay cowardice. Humans called it preparation. Finally, Doug Wilson straightened up from his station. "I've got it. The entity is attracted to specific energy signatures, particularly the kind produced by standard Union power cores." "And our modified cores?" Lisa asked. "Just as we thought. It barely notices them." Lisa nodded. This confirmed their theory. The entity wasn't randomly consuming everything. It was drawn to certain energy patterns like a predator to specific prey. "Contact the other human ships," she ordered. "Begin deployment of the sensor network." From the Endeavour and 5 other human vessels, small probes launched into space, forming a web around the entity. Each probe contained a specially designed energy source, not to attack the entity, but to understand it. On the observation deck, Ambassador John Carter stood with several Union representatives who had demanded to witness the human strategy firsthand. "This is your great plan?" asked the Zoth commander, his voice heavy with disdain. "To surround it with tiny machines." John nodded. "Before you fight an enemy, you must understand it." "There's no time," the Zoth insisted. "It grows larger while you collect data." "Actually," John replied calmly, "it's moving in the direction we predicted, at exactly the speed we calculated. That's what the initial scans were for." The alien representatives fell silent as they processed this information. "You're not trying to stop it," said the Valkyrie observer suddenly. "You're trying to control where it goes." John smiled. "Now you're thinking like a human." Back on the bridge, Lisa received the confirmation she was waiting for. The sensor network was active, providing a complete 3-dimensional map of the entity's behavior. "All ships, prepare for Phase 2, she announced. "Operation Breadcrumb begins now." The name Operation Breadcrumb confused the alien observers. But Lisa Reynolds and her crew understood the reference perfectly. In an old Earth story, 2 children had marked their path through a forest with breadcrumbs. The humans planned to do something similar with the void entity, lead it along a carefully planned route. "Deploy the first beacon," Lisa ordered. From the Endeavour, a small device launched toward a predetermined position. It contained a power source specifically designed to attract the entity's attention. "Beacon active," reported Kevin Martinez from the tactical station. "Energy signature matches our target profile." Everyone on the bridge watched intently. The entity, which had been spreading in all directions, began to shift. One section of the darkness stretched toward the beacon like a curious finger. "It's working," Alan whispered. Lisa kept her expression neutral. "Launch Beacon 2. A second device deployed, positioned farther away from populated areas." As the entity consumed the first beacon, it detected the second and moved toward it. On the observation deck, the alien representatives watched in amazement. "I don't understand," said the Zoth commander. Those beacons aren't weapons. They're too small to harm it. John Carter nodded. We're not trying to destroy the entity. At least not yet. We first need to move it away from inhabited systems. You're luring it away? Asked the Valkyrie observer, his antenna twitching in surprise, like a predator with bait. Exactly, John confirmed. Something this powerful can't be defeated by direct confrontation, so we're using its own nature against it. Back on the bridge, the crew continued their work with quiet efficiency. Each beacon was carefully calibrated, strong enough to attract the entity, but not so powerful that it would grow significantly from consuming it. Beacon 3 deployed, Doug Wilson reported. Energy signature stable. Lisa studied the tactical display. The entity was following their trail perfectly, moving away from the populated Lyran sector toward an empty region of space. The Union Council is requesting an update, Maria Garcia said from her communication station. Tell them Phase 2 is proceeding as planned, Lisa replied. The entity is following our path. The plan required 6 more beacons, each drawing the entity further into unoccupied space. The human ships moved in perfect coordination, staying just ahead of the darkness. Terak, the Valkyrie observer who had been assigned to the Endeavor, approached Lisa during a brief break. Your species confuses me, he admitted. You spend so much time planning for dangers that might never happen. You install backup systems for your backup systems. You map escape routes before you even arrive somewhere. Lisa took a sip of water. And how does that seem to you now? Terak's antenna drooped slightly. Like wisdom, we should have respected. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the bridge. Captain, we have a problem. Kevin's voice came through the comm system. The entity's behavior is changing. It's still following our beacons, but it's reaching out in other directions too. Lisa hurried back to the bridge, Terak following close behind. The tactical display showed the entity stretching tendrils of darkness toward nearby star systems, even as its main mass continued along their planned route. It's learning, Doug Wilson said grimly, adapting to our pattern. Lisa studied the display for a long moment. The other crew members waited for her decision, tension visible on their faces but controlled, as humans had been trained to do. Implement Contingency Plan Alpha, she finally ordered. Alert the other ships. Alan looked up sharply. Are you sure? We haven't tested that configuration outside simulations. That's why we ran those simulations, Alan, Lisa replied calmly. For moments exactly like this, Contingency Plan Alpha wasn't just a backup plan. It was a backup for the backup. The kind of planning that other species had once mocked humans for. All ships, reconfigure your beacon deployment patterns, Lisa ordered through the fleet channel. Switch to formation Delta 6. The human vessels moved with practiced precision. Instead of placing beacons in a linear path, they now positioned them in a complex 3-dimensional pattern. What are you doing? Terak asked, watching the tactical display with confusion. Doug Wilson answered while adjusting the Endeavor's course. We're creating an energy maze. Instead of leading the entity in a straight line, we're giving it choices, but all paths lead to the same destination. On the main screen, the entity's tendrils wavered as it detected the new pattern of energy sources. It seemed to hesitate, testing each direction. It's working, Kevin Martinez reported. The secondary extensions are retracting. Lisa nodded. Continue monitoring. Be ready for further adaptations. Ambassador John Carter was explaining the strategy to the Union representatives on the observation deck. The entity seeks the path of least resistance to the highest energy reward, he said. We're using that behavior to guide it, the same way humans have redirected rivers or controlled forest fires for thousands of years. The Zoth commander still seemed skeptical. And where exactly are you leading it? John gestured to a star map. To these coordinates, an empty region with a particular quantum signature that our scientists believe will naturally repel the entity. And if you're wrong? Asked the Valkyrie observer. John's expression remained calm. Then we implement contingency plan beta, or gamma, or delta. How many contingency plans do you have? The Zoth demanded. 26, John replied simply. One for each letter in the English alphabet. And if those aren't enough, we'll create more. Back on the bridge, the situation was growing more complex. The entity had resumed following their energy trail, but its behavior was becoming less predictable. It's consuming the beacons faster now, Alan reported, learning to extract energy more efficiently. Lisa made a quick decision. Increase the spacing between beacons. Make it work harder to find each one. Maria Garcia looked up from her communication station. Captain, we're receiving the signal from the horizon. They're detecting unusual activity at the edge of the entity. Put it through, Lisa ordered. Captain Sam Cooper's face appeared on screen. Reynolds, our sensors are picking up what looks like replication. Small fragments of the entity are breaking off, then growing independently. A cold feeling settled in Lisa's stomach, but her voice remained steady. Send us your sensor data. All ships, prepare to adjust formation. Doug Wilson analyzed the incoming information. He's right. The entity isn't just one organism anymore. It's spawning. The bridge fell silent. This was a development none of their simulations had predicted. Options? Lisa asked. Her crew didn't panic. They had trained for unexpected developments, even if not this specific one. If they behave like the parent entity, we could use smaller beacons to lead each fragment, Kevin suggested. Alan shook his head. We don't have enough beacons for multiple entities. We could try increasing the energy signature of our current beacons, Doug offered. Make them attractive enough that the fragments rejoin the main mass. Lisa considered this. That's risky. Higher energy might accelerate their growth. What about the shield technology? Maria asked quietly. The one we developed after the Centauri incident. Everyone looked at her. The Centauri shields were experimental, designed to contain energy rather than block it. Lisa's expression changed as she saw the possibility. Doug, how quickly can we reconfigure our shield generators to create a containment field? 4 hours, maybe 3 if we push it, he replied. Make it 2, Lisa said. I need every ship to prepare their containment systems. We're switching to contingency plan Echo. The next 2 hours were the most intense of the mission. Every human ship worked at full capacity, reconfiguring their shield generators to create the experimental containment field. Containment shields at 60%, Doug reported from his engineering station. The emitters are showing some strain, but holding. Lisa nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The void entity continued to spawn smaller fragments, each one beginning to move independently. How many are we tracking now? She asked. Kevin checked his sensors. 17 distinct fragments, plus the main mass. They're spreading in different directions. The human plan was changing by the minute, adapting to the new threat. This flexibility, once seen as indecision by other species, was now their greatest strength. All ships begin containment protocol, Lisa ordered. Target the fragments first. The Endeavor and the other human vessels moved into position around the smaller pieces of the entity. From each ship, a new kind of energy field projected outward, not trying to destroy the darkness, but to contain it. Containment field active, Doug announced. First fragment is secured. On the screen, one of the dark extensions of the entity became surrounded by a glowing blue barrier. It thrashed against the field but couldn't break through. Second fragment contained, came the report from the horizon. One by one, the human ships captured the entity's offspring. It was delicate work. The fields had to be perfectly calibrated to hold the darkness without feeding it more energy. The alien observers watched in amazement. What had seemed like human overcaution, their insistence on developing containment technology that no one thought necessary, was now saving the galaxy. 3 fragments remaining, Alan reported. The main entity is showing signs of distress. The massive darkness at the center of their operation was pulsing strangely, as if sensing the trap closing around its children. It's going to attack, Lisa realized suddenly. All ships, strengthen your shields. The warning came just in time. The main entity sent a massive surge of dark energy outward, striking the human vessels. The impact rocked the Endeavor, causing the lights to flicker. Shields holding at 70%, Doug called out, his fingers flying over his controls, diverting additional power. Lisa gripped her command chair. Continue the containment operation. We can't let those fragments escape. The human ships pressed on despite the attack, their shields absorbing damage that would have destroyed less prepared vessels. Their backup systems, once mocked as unnecessary, kept them functioning. Last fragment contained, Kevin finally announced. All smaller entities are secured. A brief cheer went up on the bridge, quickly silenced as Lisa raised her hand. We still have the main entity to deal with, she reminded them. And it's angry. The massive darkness had stopped moving toward their energy beacons. Instead, it seemed to be gathering itself, condensing into a more concentrated form. What's it doing? Tarek asked, his voice betraying fear for the first time. Doug studied his readings. It's changing its energy signature, becoming more dense. It's preparing something, Lisa said. All ships, move to Formation Omega. Prepare for maximum containment. The human vessels formed a sphere around the entity, each ship positioning itself at precise coordinates. This formation had been designed for the worst-case scenario, the one the humans had hoped they would never need. Captain, Maria called from communications. We're receiving a transmission from Union Command. They want to know if they should evacuate the nearby systems. Lisa looked at the entity, now pulsing with ominous energy. Tell them no. If this doesn't work, there won't be time to evacuate anyway. She opened a channel to the other human ships. All vessels, prepare to implement Contingency Plan Zeta. This is not a drill. Even the human crews fell silent at this command. Plan Zeta was their final option, the one they had created hoping it would forever remain theoretical. The bridge of the Endeavor became absolutely silent. Contingency Plan Zeta wasn't just dangerous, it was potentially sacrificial. The plan required perfect timing and coordination between all human ships. Begin core destabilization sequence, Lisa ordered, her voice steady despite what she was asking her crew to do. Doug Wilson's hands moved quickly over his console, initiating core protocols, disengaging safety parameters. What the humans were attempting had never been done before. They were deliberately destabilizing their ship's power cores, not to cause an explosion, but to create a specific energy pattern. All personnel moved to emergency stations, Lisa announced ship-wide. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Throughout the Endeavor, crew members moved with practiced efficiency to their assigned positions. Some headed to escape pods, others to reinforced sections of the ship. They had rehearsed this many times, never expecting to actually implement it. The other ships report ready, Maria said from communications. They're awaiting your signal. Lisa looked around at her bridge crew. Last chance to object. No one spoke. They had all volunteered for this mission, knowing the risks. Begin synchronized destabilization, she ordered. The ship's lights dimmed as power was redirected to the core. A low hum built throughout the vessel, vibrating through the deck plates. On the observation deck, John Carter was quickly explaining the plan to the alien representatives. The entity feeds on energy, he said. We're about to give it more than it can handle. The Zoth commander stared at him. You're creating a trap, with your own ships as bait. John nodded. The cores will generate a unique energy signature, one that our scientists believe will disrupt the entity's structure when consumed. And your crews? The Valkyrie asked quietly. John's expression was solemn. We have evacuation protocols in place. What he didn't say was that those protocols might not be enough. Contingency Plan Zeta had always been theoretical, a last resort if all else failed. Back on the bridge, the situation was intensifying. Core destabilization at 60%, Doug reported, sweat visible on his forehead. The reaction is still controlled, but approaching critical thresholds. The ship shuddered. Warning lights flashed across every console. The entity is responding, Kevin called from tactical. It's moving toward us. On the main screen, the darkness surged toward the human ships, drawn by the unusual energy pattern they were creating. All ships maintain position. Lisa ordered through the fleet channel. Do not break formation, no matter what happens. The human vessels held their positions in the sphere around the entity, each one now glowing with increasing energy signatures as their cores approached destabilization. 70%, Doug announced. We're entering the danger zone. Alan looked up from his security station. Captain, we need to start evacuating non-essential personnel. Lisa nodded. Begin evacuation sequence. Bridge crew remains at stations. Throughout the endeavor, crew members moved to escape pods as alarm sirens wailed. Similar scenes played out on the other human ships. Orderly evacuation even in the face of extreme danger. The entity is accelerating toward us, Kevin reported, his voice tight. Impact in 30 seconds. Lisa opened a channel to all human ships. Hold position. This is exactly what we want. The bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew what was at stake and what might happen to them. Core destabilization at 85%, Doug said. We're approaching the point of no return. The entity surrounded the human ships now, its darkness reaching tendrils toward the energy sources. It seemed eager, hungry. All ships, final stage, Lisa ordered. Synchronized destabilization pattern, Alpha Omega. Each human vessel adjusted its core output to create a specific pattern, not random energy, but a carefully designed sequence. Together, they formed a complex energy web that the entity began to consume. It's working, Kevin said with quiet amazement. The entity is absorbing the pattern. The darkness pulsed as it fed on the energy from the human ships. But something was happening. The entity's edges began to flicker and distort. Structural instability detected in the entity, Ellen reported. Our plan is working. But inside the Endeavor, the situation was growing dire. Core approaching critical, Doug warned. 2 minutes until irreversible cascade. Lisa stood from her command chair. Begin final evacuation. All remaining personnel to escape pods. The bridge crew hesitated, looking to their captain. That's an order, Lisa said firmly. I'll initiate the final sequence. The bridge crew reluctantly left their stations. They followed evacuation protocols perfectly, another procedure they had practiced countless times. Only Lisa remained on the bridge of the Endeavor. Captain, you need to evacuate too, Alan said from the doorway. Lisa shook her head. Someone needs to ensure the final sequence activates correctly. The timing has to be perfect. After a moment of hesitation, Alan nodded and left. The escape pods launched from the Endeavor one by one, carrying the crew to safety. Lisa stood alone on the bridge, monitoring the destabilization process. The ship groaned around her as systems approached critical levels. Core destabilization at 97%. The computer announced. Final sequence ready. On the other human ships, similar scenes played out. Most captains had evacuated with their crews, but some, like Sam Cooper on the horizon, had chosen to remain behind. All ships in final position. Sam's voice came through the comm. Ready when you are, Reynolds. Lisa took a deep breath. Initiate final sequence. Now. She pressed the command, then ran for the last escape pod. Behind her, the ship's core began the carefully designed energy pulse that would complete their trap. The entity had fully surrounded the human vessels now, consuming the energy they released. But as the final sequence activated, something changed. The darkness began to twist inward, collapsing on itself. From the escape pods, the human crews watched as their ships glowed with blinding intensity. The entity pulsed, expanding and contracting rapidly. It's working, Doug whispered, watching from his pod. The contradictory energy patterns are tearing it apart from inside. The entity's structure was breaking down, unable to process the complex energy signature the humans had created. It had evolved to consume energy, but not this specific pattern, designed to be indigestible. A massive shock wave rippled through space as the entity imploded. The human ships, their cores pushed beyond limits, broke apart in the blast. 3 days later, Ambassador John Carter stood again before the Union Council. The chambers were packed with representatives from every species. "The void entity has been neutralized," he reported. "Our sensors confirm it has collapsed completely, leaving only traces of exotic particles that are rapidly decaying." The council chamber, once filled with mockery for human caution, now fell silent in respect. "What were your losses?" asked Hezix, the Zoth Prime. John's expression showed the grief he felt. 6 ships destroyed. Most crew members evacuated successfully, but we lost 13 brave individuals who stayed behind to ensure the final sequence activated properly. The names of those 13 humans appeared on the display behind him. The council members bowed their heads in a moment of silence. "The Union misjudged humanity," Hezix finally said. "What we saw as cowardice was wisdom. What we mocked as overcaution was foresight." Admiral Krell, who had once called humans the cowards of the cosmos, stood from his seat. "I formally request that the Union adopt human safety protocols for all fleet operations." One by one, other representatives made similar requests. Human contingency planning, backup systems, and risk assessment, once derided, were now seen as essential. "We will share all our protocols," John promised. "But remember, they work because we develop them before we need them, not after." On the edges of Union space, a memorial was built where the human ships had made their stand. It became a pilgrimage site for species across the galaxy, a reminder that courage comes in many forms. Back on Earth, in the headquarters of the Human Space Command, General Patricia Winters authorized a new insignia for all human vessels. It featured a simple shield design with words that had once been an insult but were now worn with pride. "The cowards of the cosmos, always ready." In the years that followed, the galaxy changed. Species that had once rushed into danger now paused to plan. Warriors who had valued direct confrontation now appreciated the wisdom of backup strategies. And humans continued as they always had, preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. Not because they were cowards, but because they understood that true bravery meant being ready for anything the universe might throw at them.